Okay, is journalism dead? Welcome everybody to another episode of A.M.University. I'm your host, Antoine Miller. I got three guests that I am extremely proud to have on the show. I don't know everybody, but I've either seen their work or I've talked to them about their work, and I am a big fan of everybody on this panel, to say the least. With saying that, it is I don't even know how to phrase it as far as how the media is going. But before we dive into that, I just want to introduce the panel. First, senior writer for ESPN, wrote for the Undefeated, 20 plus years at the Washington Post. From sports to politics, I had the pleasure of chatting with this man, and he just seems like the ultimate professional. Michael Fletcher, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great.
Glad to have you on. Owner of the Black Cajun Media Company, in which he freelances and writes articles about a lot of topics that is very argumentative, to say the least. Through his channel and through his media company, he helps guys from Division I all the way down to guys that just need a job in the tri-state area. He's starting a youth transition program coming this fall, where he's helping kids more so with academics, as well as being able to be informed about the clearinghouse and everything in between. I met DELGRECO Wilson a couple years ago, man, and I'm really honored to call him a friend. And I just think he's a stand-up guy, Mr. DELGRECO Wilson.
Pleasure to be here for you, Antoine.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And last but not least, man, so I graduated, but I actually started at Camden High the year after Dewan graduated. And you know, I was always intrigued about just quality writing. I always really appreciated it. And Mr. Anastasia, you know, being at Camden High, obviously we saw him a lot and we saw his writing a lot. And it really broke my heart when you retired, to be honest with you. But you know, we'll dive in deep into that. With his 30 plus years of experience in the Philadelphia and Jersey area, Courier-Post to Philly INQUIRER, everything in between. Again, Mr. Phil Anastasia, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Antoine. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Okay, so let's just hop right into the monkey in the room, man. I look at you three guys, right? And I'm so privileged and blessed to have you three guys on the show, because whether I've known you for a short period of time or a long period of time, you really look like you take your job seriously, as far as journalism, as far as finding the facts, as far as what you deem as truthful in the story. I feel like I'm 36 years old. I feel like we lost complete sight of that in the media. I turn on my phone, I turn on my TV, I turn on CNN. It's just pure entertainment, you know. And I'm like, where did we go wrong, and where do we draw that line, right? So I just want to start with Mr. Anastasia first, just with the topic of the discussion. Do you feel journalism is dead?
I wouldn't say dead, but it's certainly changed a lot, and not for the better. You mentioned that I have 30 years experience. It's actually 40, Antoine. I retired after 41 years. So I first started writing at the Courier-Post in 1979. That's how far back I go. So I was kind of privy to all the changes that happened in this particular field. You know, and for the first 20 years or so, it wasn't that dramatic, the changes, but obviously, you know, with the internet, and then with social media, things just changed dramatically. And then hand in glove with that was the pressure on media companies that were struggling financially. And so I think they kind of lowered some of their standards, and you know, it just became a compounding thing. So you know, I'm an old school journalist, and I still see people do really good work. I really respect a lot of writers and reporters who do really good work. But we're all kind of swimming in the same water now, you know, as people who don't do such great work, and frankly, in with the public in general. You know, I mean, when you're on Twitter, you know, you're on Twitter with you know, an established reporter, but you're on Twitter with, you know, somebody's dad too. You know, it's the same water we're all swimming in. So things have gotten very complicated, and not for the better. But I don't want to believe that journalism is dead. I want to believe that I know there's still good people out there, and I want to believe that there are readers and followers and listeners who are still discriminating enough to respect and honor and want to hear from and read about people who do good and honest work. So, you know, maybe that's me being an old guy trying to say, no, it's not that bad. But I want to believe that.
Mr. DelGreco?
Well, the barriers to entry have disappeared. So anyone with a cell phone or a laptop can jump in the game. And as a result, we've seen really a massive proliferation of just sources. You know, people just put stuff out. And now it seems to be a focus on, you know, who's first, who got traded, who committed, who signed, who got cut. Everybody's racing to be that guy. That, I think, is, you know, it may be entertaining, you know, if you follow college recruiting and stuff like that, or free agent signing, if that's something that interests you, yeah, it's fun. As far as pure journalism, I do think that we've witnessed really a decline in the standards. I think if even in, not just in the quality, but in the quantity, if you pick up a newspaper, like the Philadelphia, as a kid, I used to pick up the Daily News every day. It might have been this thick. Now that thing is, you know, maybe 15 sheets of folded paper. You know, they really just don't cover. Let's take, for example, high school and college sports. They've abandoned coverage of high school sports in Philadelphia, more or less, just abandoned it. The Courier-Post still does a very good job. The Delaware County Daily Times still does a very good job. But Philadelphia is a pro sports town. And so everybody's focused on the Eagles and, you know, why Jalen Hurts is not the guy. So that's what the talk shows are covering. That's what the Inquirer and the Daily News are covering. And you can't even find out who's the leading scorer in the public league or who's the leading rusher in the public league. There are no box scores. All of that stuff is gone. So that aspect of journalism, you know, just daily grind it out on a beat, covering it, is really just gone. And I don't pretend to be trying to replace that. I think you did a pretty good job of kind of discussing what it is I like to do. I'm more or less an advocate. And anything that I write and publish, it's an opinion piece, you know, and I stand by that and I put my name on it. I don't have a screen name where I'm hiding behind it and making accusations at people. And I take pride in that, you know, just putting it out there. Saying, everyone knows where I'm at. I show up at the games. People confront me. People like it. They don't like it. I do think that if you know where to look, like you talked about the undefeated, it's not the undefeated anymore. It's Anscape. And if you're looking for that, you know, quality, long form pieces, you can still find it over there. But it's not widely publicized. You know, if you don't know, you don't know. And a lot of the good stuff is now behind a paywall because people have to, you know, you got to support yourself. So if you're taking the time to do it, you want to make a couple of dollars. So it exists, but it's not 50 cents at the newsstand anymore. You kind of got to know where to go, how to get it, who's doing well and where they are, and follow them. So it's just a different context for it all. But I do think to some extent, good journalism really does still exist, but it's hard to find.
Mr. Fletcher?
Yeah, I agree with both DelGreco and Phil. I mean, I've been in journalism a long time too. I started in 1979 at the Courier News in Plainfield, New Jersey. That was my first newspaper gig. And even a small paper like that, it was a Gannett newspaper. We had a fairly substantial staff, right? And you had editors questioning everything. You had editors kind of serving as gatekeepers, saying, well, that's a good story. No, that's not a good story. And I'm not saying they were always right about those things, but you had to answer to get stuff in. Now that's, like, as you mentioned, DELGRECO, kind of that barrier to entry, I mean, almost does not exist anymore. But, there's still good journalism being done, but, it's the stakes are higher, right? When I used to work at the Baltimore Sun for years before I went to the Post. And they had investigative staff, we had foreign staff, and, you could pay, I don't know what it would cost to paper in those days, $10,000 to do a story, $15,000. And they would spend it, do the story. It was part of the paper's prestige, part of the paper's pride in doing that. Now, they might spend a lot of money on the story, but you know what? They're looking at, okay, how many clicks are being harvested by that story? And if that story doesn't do well, I mean, no one's going to directly come out and fire you, but there's just pressure next time you want to do kind of a very ambitious story. Even at a place like ESPN, which is one of the few places still printing money, right? They have their formulas for what they think works. And there was less of that when I started in this business. There was less of that 15 years ago. But the pressures are real, and it happened two ways. You mentioned social media. In the old days, we were the conduit. Like, if you wanted to learn something about the ball player, you had to it was filtered through us. Now with social media, the ball players, they recognize, if you want to just talk about sports, they recognize, cut out the middleman, go around the journalists. Why go through a filter when I could myself, write about my own activities? Look at the credits of a sports documentary on ESPN. If it's a documentary about Chris Paul, take a look at who the executive producer is. It's Chris Paul. And they used to never, that wouldn't be the kid. 15 years ago, that was a no, Phil, you should correct me if I'm wrong. That would just be no. Yeah. No, you're fair to Chris Paul, you deal with him, you go to him for answers, but he doesn't have whatever creative license. And that's totally changed. But the business has changed tremendously, and a lot of it is the access to the athlete, and the second part of it is the business pressure. The Baltimore Sun can't afford to send reporters to India anymore. They can't afford to send that many reporters to Dunbar High School to cover games. I don't think you get the box score anymore for high school games. When my son, I still have clippings upstairs in my little photo album. I'm embarrassed. My son have these little agate things about, you got 15 against Patterson, or he ran cross country, he did this, he played baseball. My daughter swam. You have these little things that you cut out of the newspaper. That doesn't exist anymore.
I mean, so because I'm listening to you guys talk, and so do you have to adapt to the times if you were to get in journalism now? Like, because let's say the Camden High article, right? We don't have to go into context about the article, but is that how you got to attack journalism? Do you have to have the shock value now and double back and put what you deem as facts behind the article because of what you guys saying? Because you saying it's a different time. We got to worry about the financial aspect of it. So, and I'm just asking you guys because you're a professional journalism. Do you have to compromise yourself? Do you have to adapt? Do you have to, like in those type of instances? I guess the question that I'm really asking y'all is, overall, what do you think about the article? Like, you don't have to go in and tell. And two, do you have to sensationalize things in order for people to read, your work? Let's start with you, Brother Dale.
Well, the title of my response to that was, included the word hitman. I didn't view that as journalism. I thought that this guy was hired for an assignment, and he wasn't a full-time member of the staff at NJ.com or whatever. They said it, if you read it, he was hired like right when that assignment was given to him, and it was a 6-month assignment. I don't know if someone who really is going to be covering high school, college basketball in the state of New Jersey for a career is going to write a piece like that. You know, I don't know. I really would be hesitant to do something like that if I wanted access to the players and the coaches and all of that stuff going forward. I think this guy set out to do exactly what you're referring to in terms of just being sensational, you know, throw some really provocative stuff out there and get a lot of clicks. And I'm sure it worked. You know, I'm sure it worked. You know, they decided that they would smear the name of the Camden High team, the basketball program, and the Wagner family, you know, with perhaps a third generation McDonald's All-American coming through. You know, that was really a big target, and they went after it. And I felt that it was so unfair that it warranted a strong response. And I did my best, you know, to kind of knock it down point by point, where I think he failed to live up to any kind of responsible journalistic standards for covering high school kids.
Mr. Fletcher?
Well, you know, to answer your first question, I don't, you know, even though things have changed a lot, I don't think there's ever an excuse for compromising your standards. I don't think that's, maybe the pressure pushes some people that, you know, toward that, but I don't think we've reached that point where that's what you have to do to succeed in this business. I mean, I'll defend us a little bit. There's still a lot of good journalism, you know, being done out here in the Times, and the financial pressure and the pressure for clicks, I don't think changes that 100%. It makes it harder. There's a more narrow passageway to get where you want to get, but that still exists. Now, I read the piece, and I'll tell you that to me, it was probably a failure of editing as much as anything. For the parts I would have not run with, right? I saw some things in there that felt like, how is this relevant to the point you're making? Like,
yes,
like the point to me of the piece, and you know, you can argue about that, the merits of it, but if indeed, you know, people got sweetheart tuition deals and all that, we'll not get into every detail. It feels like a legitimate point to raise, you know, in a newspaper article. But I'm not quite sure what your step grandfather did or what, you know, all that stuff has to do with it. You know, I just feel like that's a failure in editing. It feels like a reporter, you know, reading the clips as we used to do. And I used to always tell young journalists, don't like recite the clips, you know, just think about what you're actually saying. I would even tell young journalists that even when you find things in public records, people feel like it's written down, so I have to share it. But sometimes think about kind of the larger point you're making. You know, how does this service the point of your story? And I think that's where an editor could have helped that piece.
Mr. Anastasia?
Yeah, the concerns I had were similar to what Fletcher just said. It's, you know, I think the fact that DJ Wagner is a third generation, you know, Wagner to play for that program, and you know, obviously the most legendary basketball family that ever come through that city. And the fact that there's some questions about whether some kids lived in the city or got sweetheart deals for tuition, I don't know why those two things are conflated. I mean, to me, they don't have, I don't know what one has to do with the other. I guess in his effort to provide context for the story, you know, I think he got into a little bit too much detail about, you know, DJ's background that really didn't have anything to do with the issues he was trying to address. So I can see from the Wagner's family point of view, or from Camden folks' point of view, some real questions about what does one have to do with the other. So, you know, I guess it was an editing failure, but I agree with DELGRECO. I think the journalist was hired, you know, with the idea that this is the kind of work he's going to do, that you know, we want to sort of do this, you know, investigative stuff, that overturn rocks or whatever and see what's underneath them. And I understand that. I think that's important work for journalists to do. I just didn't quite understand why, you know, DJ's background and Milt and DeJuan, what that had to do with the questions about, you know, whether a kid came in from Roselle or wherever he came in from, you know, and the other thing is, you know, I covered Camden High a lot in my career. I mean, going back to, you know, Milton and Billy Thompson and those guys. And there were times that I wrote things that people weren't crazy about, but I always felt like it was very, and Clarence and I clashed a few times, and he wasn't the only coach I clashed with. I clashed a little bit with some other coaches as well, but I always felt like it was very important if you wrote something, and DELGRECO addressed this, to show up the next day. And I remember Dewan scored 100, and I wrote that I didn't think that was a great thing because it was against like Camden County Tech, and I felt like it was. I just felt like the kid didn't need to do that to prove that he was. And it really, to me, was more the coach. But anyway, I mean, you could argue one way or the other. But anyway, I wrote it, and people were not happy about it. But I went to their next game, and made sure that I was there. And Wani it didn't even bother Wani, but like some other people got kind of pissed about it. But I don't know that this gentleman, and I'm not trying to cast any aspersions on him. I don't know that he's been, he showed up at Camden the next day, and maybe he did. And if he did, good for him. But I suspect maybe he didn't.
Okay. So again, I really appreciate you guys coming on here. I started this platform because I always wanted to challenge the system, like of basketball, of youth sports, of just everything in between that I feel like no one's talking about. I feel like it's a lot of surface level conversations. And I think media is at the forefront of a lot of those conversations. This is a powerful thing. This thing called media. This thing is a monster. And I think in a lot of ways, people are just like you said, just how can I get rich from it quick? How can I get eyes on me and just forgetting the art of it, right? So I just want to end with this from everybody, starting with Mr. Fletcher. If you came up on an upcoming journalist or someone that was getting into it nowadays, how would you tell them to go about it?
I talk to young journalists all the time, and I always say, get out there and meet people, try to witness things, try to sort of feel the context of what you're writing about. It's so easy now to, people say, produce content. I can sit here on my computer in my home office and churn stuff out all day. And I tell people all the time, if you're recycling it off the internet, almost by definition, you're not breaking news. Like you are just recycling what someone else has written, maybe put it into a different package. People email people, they don't meet them. And some of the best stories I've gotten in my life have come off of like lunch meetings when I went to talk about X. And as you're leaving the lunch, topic Y comes up. And it might just be a passing comment. And you sort of chop that up a little bit, then you figure out that's the story I want. And you form relationships with people. It's a little bit like Phil and DELGRECO said. Also, when you write something critical of somebody, you stand by it, and if you're wrong, you're wrong. And if you make a mistake, you acknowledge it, but you basically stand up for your work, and people respect that. Some people, when I covered politics, some of the politicians who would ream you out end up becoming your best source because like there's a measure of respect that I think is generated when they see you eye to eye. You could have a man-to-man conversation or a woman-to-man conversation, and just see each other on that human level. So I tell young journalists, get out there, meet people, try to understand their world, understand what people are dealing with, and then you can better render that for the audience.
Mr. Anastasia?
Well, this is not just theoretical for me. I mean, I've been teaching down at University this is my 19th year, and I teach 2 sections of sports journalism. So, I have kids all the time. I have 36 kids this semester who, not all of them, but a lot of them, they want to cover the Yankees. A lot of them from North Jersey. So I talk to kids all the time about, journalism and where it's been. As an old timer, I kind of tell them where it's been and where it is and where it's going. We talk about a lot. And I, like Fletcher said, I mean, I talk about, the importance of kind of rolling up your sleeves and grinding away, and doing the work. And that means getting out. I mean, I was, at the end of my career, I was covering a game every day. There was just no substitute for getting out and doing the work and meeting people and talking to people and, talking to players and talking to coaches and having to hear parents tell me about, why aren't you writing about my kid? But I mean, that was just all part of it. So, rolling up your sleeves and doing the work is one thing. And the other thing is, and again, I was a sports writer, and there's a lot of different mediums now, and you have your own medium here now, but I'm big on the written word. And I would always tell these kids that, if you want to be good in this business, even if you want to have a podcast or, do videos or whatever, you really need to be able to tell a story, and you need to be able to communicate with people. And we learn how to communicate, through the written word. And that's one of the best ways that we learn how to communicate. So, I'm just big on telling people, if there are journalists that you respect and you like their work, read their work and analyze their work and try to figure out what it is. How did they come up with that story? What kind of legwork did they do to get that story into print, and how did they structure it as well? Because this is a craft, it's not an art, but there is a creative aspect to it, and you really want to try to be able to develop your own voice. So I stress to these kids all the time, learn how to communicate. So many of them got their phones down and texting each other, and I say, man, you got to look people in the eye, talk to them, and you also need to learn how to write. Even if you're not a writer in the future, learn how to write, because that's how you clearly communicate. So that's what I tell these kids all the time.
Brother Dale, take us home, man.
I agree with Mr. Fletcher. I think there's no substitute for being there firsthand and experiencing it. I think the most important thing I try to get across to the young people is to develop skills of discernment and discretion. A lot of these young guys who are out here texting and blogging and all of that stuff, they kind of get close, especially the young guys. They get close to the kids. And as a result, the kids really don't understand that this guy is playing this role as a media guy. They more or less think of him as like somebody on the internet. But what I've discovered over the past 5-10 years, I've seen several instances where these young guys get close to these kids, and they're maybe what the kids would call ear hustling, so they hear the kids talking amongst each other, and they've reported to college coaches and NBA scouts things that they've heard the kids saying, player X smokes a lot of weed, or player Y's mom, is sleeping with this AAU guy and that AAU guy. And what happens is, because I'm a little older, a lot of my friends are the scouts, and they'll call me. And so on several occasions, I've had to call these young guys up, and I say, man, you go around and you put yourself out in front of these kids, and you sort of present yourself as a friend or thing. I don't think that these kids should be worse off just because you were in the room. I don't think their opportunities should be shrinking. I don't think they should have less of a chance just because you were at a party and you saw a kid smoking a blunt one time. I mean, it's more or less like a beer now. Are you really going to run around and tell everybody that this kid's a pothead? And the kid wasn't, but he did smoke at the party that guy saw him smoke, but he wasn't a pothead. He had smoked maybe 3 or 4 times in his life. And I don't think that the young people understand, in their ambitious desire to move forward and, angle in and grab a hold and pull themselves up through the ranks, they're willing to sell some of these young kids out totally. And I think it's a dangerous playing field out there with that, because I've seen some parents, particularly a woman, she wanted to punch a dude in the face, and I had to tell her, I said, you don't really want everybody going around saying, such and such's mom will punch you in the face. That's not good either. So discernment and discretion, in addition to what Mr. Anastasia talked about, the only way to become a better writer is to write and to read good writing. And like he said, try to pattern yourself after the stuff that you really find to be of high quality. And Mr. Anastasia, I have to confess, I think it's a lost art. I don't think we got a lot of young people coming behind us who are going to take the time to really develop essays. It's a struggle. You know, once I start, I can't stop. I'll stay up to 4 or 5 in the morning, you know, to get one essay,
I know.
Right. You know, and when it's right, even I don't care if it's 4:30 in the morning. Probably not the best time to post it, but it's going out because I feel like it's ready. I need to let the world see this. And I don't think young people have that kind of passion about writing. They just want to be the first guy to tweet something and get credit for it, you know, breaking it. They're not developing essays. So I agree. It's a craft, it's an art, and people need to take the time to develop those skills.
I just want to add one thing, because that rang so true to me, DELGRECO. Like being at ESPN now, and you know, this has just been a small part of my career doing a sports thing. But everybody, I meet the interns, talk to them. 2 out of 3 people want to be Stephen A. Smith, and they don't realize that Stephen A. Smith covered preps, covered, you know, all kinds of beats at, you know, for newspapers.
Made his bones on AI. I mean, he made his bones on AI.
At the mountaintop, you know, you're spewing opinions, you know, and they want to skip all the intermediate steps. And Phil, you're so right. Writing, to me, is fundamental to this entire business. It's like the foundation of it. Even if you never have a byline in your life, like it'll help you. It's the underlying craft to this whole enterprise.
It's all about takes. I never had a take in my life. I don't have a take. I definitely don't have a hot take. So
yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, man, again, I'm 36 years old. I appreciate everything you guys have done for kids, for journalism, for sports, for politics. You know, like for me personally, that all those type of things intertwine. Like every time I see you guys, I'm a real, I grew up in Camden, right? So we don't have many mentors, right? So you got to look at people and admire them from afar and create your own type of mentors and what so have you. And just talking to Mr. Fletcher briefly and watching Mr. Anastasia at work and having a relationship with DELGRECO, I really admire the craft of what you guys do. I hope that you never felt tainted and felt like wary about, you know, about how the world thinks. People appreciate you guys. And I just want to thank you for coming on here, stating your opinions on things, and hopefully we get it right. Let's cross our fingers.
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Really good meeting all you guys, man.
Absolutely.
It did.
Yes, sir. All right,
Real
guys.
pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. And Fletcher, DELGRECO, great to share this panel with you. Thank you, Antoine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you to all you guys. I really appreciate it.
Talk to you guys soon.
All right.
All right.